So you're telling me that you did a Tough Mudder at the weekend?
I did. I joined my son's rugby group, did a Tough Mudder at Cholmondeley. It was tough, did what it said on the tin. There's mud still coming out of my ears, literally.
So you finished it then, I guess, did you?
Yes, yeah. Admittedly, I did not do every single obstacle.
Disappointing.
I know.
That's very disappointing.
Partly I have incredibly weak upper body.
Oh, right.
So some of them you have to kind of like climb over walls. It's just, flat sort of wooden walls. There was another where it was a sequence of mud hills. And I've realised I'm not a very brilliant team player. I don't know why it's taken me 46 years to work that out.
We recognised that a while ago.
Hence why I now work on my own.
That's why she works on her own. So
yeah, I felt guilty that people had to keep pulling me up. And it's like, well, no, come on, that's what we're doing. Yeah, no, I'm just going to do my own thing and walk around this one. So yeah, it was good fun though. It was good
Very
fun.
good.
I'd recommend it.
It was a nice weekend for it.
Beautiful. The weather's perfect actually because it had been scorching the day before, but Sunday was just sort of temperate and ideal.
I was learning
weather.
to paddleboard at the weekend.
Oh, how did that go?
So
did you fall in a lot?
I fell in a lot. And it wasn't helped by the fact that my kids were in a boat, a kayak, pushing me off the entire time. So, but
Right. Yeah, not so good. Why weren't they on paddleboards too?
Because we only had one paddleboard.
Oh, fair enough. Did you buy or rent?
We borrowed.
Okay,
right.
Right.
So it was good though. We've got to make the most of it, isn't it? This time of year.
Absolutely. Well,
last weekend of summer, really.
Breath was freezing this morning. I think it's gone, hasn't it? We are approaching autumn very, very quickly.
All good.
Yeah.
Should we talk about what we're here to talk about?
Yeah, go on.
So welcome to the SME Growth podcast. I'm your host, Richard Buckle. David Parry is away this week. So I have with me a guest this morning, Andrea
Miller. We decided on Miller.
So we decided on Andrea's surname just now. Andrea worked at Wellmeadow for
7 years.
7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Best 7 years of your life, probably. Before
that's another podcast.
That's a whole series, isn't it? That's a whole series of podcasts. So, and you used to work on all sorts of like HR related matters for our clients.
Yes.
Many of our clients still.
Yes, and I still work with some. Still putting up with me.
Still talk about Andrea. Where's Andrea gone? So I was somewhere yesterday, and they were lamenting the fact that they no longer.
Well, give them my details.
But you took the decision a couple of years ago to set up on your own, with our blessing and
support, very much. Yeah.
And so we thought today, seeing as Dave's away, we were talking the other day. I said I've got to get a guest on, and last minute you very kindly subjected yourself to coming on here.
I know.
Yes. And so we were thinking about what to talk about, and you've we got onto the conversation of the
Hermoso kiss.
The Hermoso kiss,
yes.
Which I'm going to be like...
Topical current affairs, yeah.
And I'm going to be totally honest here. Like, I don't follow football,
it's
really.
It's not the biggest football.
I'm not a big football fan. The last time I was really interested in football, I think Peter Shilton was still in goal.
Okay.
So that's going to give a bit of context for where I'm at. I obviously do see the news. I knew there was something going on. But... Yeah.
It's something that hasn't just obviously hit the football fans, and it's a real shame because actually it was a great final, and I believe a Spanish team absolutely deserved to win. Although, obviously it was a great shame for the Lionesses, but it's been completely overshadowed by this issue of broken down into, if you think about it, yes, they are a football team, and that's what mostly we think of them as. But also, this is an entity which should be seen as a business, and is actually very much run as a business. So if you put it into that context, what you had is somebody very senior, with the most senior person and male in the business, non-consensually kissing a member of staff, an employee, at a work event, very publicly, and the story that's, the kind of repercussions of that have come out subsequently is completely overshadowed really the Spanish team's win, which is a real shame, but it's a real lesson for employers there as well, certainly.
Because there was quite a lot. I mean, I didn't really obviously saw the story because it was huge, wasn't it? So the whole event was
you can't
big,
ignore it really.
And you can't really,
football fan or not,
you're going to see it.
There.
And then there was some kind of debate around whether it was right or wrong, and different people were weighing in on different things. And I guess maybe the lines were perceived to be blurry just around the fact that was it a work event? Was it not a work event?
Yeah, it was very much so a work event. That definitely has question marks over that, have repercussions of what we can think about as employers and how we need to consider where things happen and what we can, the way we can behave and so forth. I think firstly, there's a couple of big lessons there, or kind of topics that have come out of it. And one is ensuring that where the lines are and how to behave, not just as senior managers, which is really important as well, because the power balance is there. So somebody acting like that as a senior manager, it's kind of like they should know better. And also you're putting somebody in a position of, can they complain? Because they're complaining about the most senior guy, and look at how long it's taken him to resign. He's had his bum on hunger strike, I believe. Most other people have not been that kind of supportive, I don't think. But it's that happened very, very publicly, very well evidenced. And he's taken quite a long time really to back off and actually put his resignation in. So it's kind of, we've got to think about what are we doing then as employers to ensure that sort of thing isn't happening in the workplace. And it's a bit of an extreme example. You don't generally get things happening so publicly in a business.
But it got me thinking about it when we were talking about it. And I was in a meeting yesterday where we were having a related discussion around this about and there was a particular employee, and she'd mentioned to one of the business owners that in a previous role she'd had an issue with somebody, and it was around how they stood by the desk. And in terms of standing over someone when they're sitting at a desk, I guess personal body space, that type of thing. And it's things that maybe we don't tend to think about that maybe we should a little bit, even
Absolutely.
if it's the landscape of work is changing quite dramatically from a sort of, I don't know, how do I put it, a generational perspective. Well, and I think it's important to recognize that different generations have different expectations and different social norms maybe.
Yes.
And actually understanding those is probably beneficial for everyone in business.
I think being self-aware is really important, and unless you make people think about how they're behaving, most people don't have a really, really strong a sense of self-awareness, which is why you have to train. So the training really is really, really important. So, that example, so say somebody was leaning in on somebody else, they might well not think about someone else's personal space because they don't care themselves. So they wouldn't care if somebody else was leaning over them, but the other person absolutely does. And they might feel really, dominated by that, threatened by it, just uncomfortable, a bit grossed out even maybe, depending on the person. So it's making people think about actually, how do we behave, and setting the expectations really strongly.
Yeah.
Because actually, as you say, generationally, it can be a minefield. Because, and we'll come, I think we're going to, chat a little bit more about kind of how, we've already mentioned work events, and what that used to look like and what it looks like now. And the sort of, there's a lot of pitfalls, but you can mitigate them. And in terms of, how do we behave at work, you set the standards, absolutely. And also, going back to that, the FA president kissing his employee, that sets a standard, absolutely. And I don't think, that obviously couldn't be ignored. Because what you're saying is, it's fine for employers to kiss their female employees on the mouth with having no personal relationship with them, without having any consent. I think most people would see in black and white, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't have to tell.
No, I mean, some of this stuff, it's a shame, isn't it?
Don't snog your employees.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's one of those things where it's, you do think some of this stuff seems like it should be common sense.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the sad thing with that story as well, like you say, it totally overshadowed the achievement of the team and the women involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
With something that is like, it was unnecessary. It was, if that was in any other setting,
yes. Yes.
It's, you can't just,
Can you imagine if it was, say, a company award night and the MD planted a kiss on the mouth of the, accountant who just won the award? Everyone would be, surely, you'd imagine, you'd hope anyway. And that's no different. It's no different. Just because it's, what they're employed to do is a physical job. So they are more touchy-feely. There is more hugging on the pitch. Probably, if he'd just hugged her, that then would have been normalised. Actually, in a workplace, as you well know, Richard, hugging's not always welcome, is it?
I would just clarify that.
It's not a hugger.
I'm not a hugger. I'm not at all.
Fist bumps at Christmas.
Hugging is for wives and children. Wife and children, I should say. Before, I'm not, the world's most tactile person.
No, certainly not.
You might get a fist bump at Christmas. That would be about the extent of it.
Yes.
That's enough.
Yes.
But safe, you see.
But
safe.
That is safe.
And I've put my boundaries in.
Absolutely.
Everyone's got to know where they stand.
You do set expectations. Like, I'm never going to congratulate you with a cuddle.
Even though you might want to.
Even though all your employees have been desperate for a hug for years. It's
I have got that kind of cuddly frame, maybe, that people think, he's safe, he's secure, that type of thing.
He's a family man.
That's it. Yeah. But so one of the things that we thought that we could lead on to in this, and it is kind of topical, talking about this whole area of boundaries and work and, where do we draw lines and things like that is. And I can get away with this because Dave's away. So we can talk about the Christmas party. Christmas party. I know it's September. I know some people are going to be thinking, what are you doing talking about Christmas?
Absolutely.
But
stuff's in the shops already. And unfortunately, restaurants, places get booked out. So you've got to think about it.
If I wasn't doing keto at the moment, I'm back on the keto. If I wasn't doing keto at the moment, I would have definitely bought some mince pies the other day when I saw them in the shop. It was August and I thought, that's got to be a record. Yes. Mince pies in the shops in August. Now, when Dave listens to this, I can already picture his face.
Yeah.
He does not want to start talking about Christmas until December 26th.
I can understand that. I can understand that.
So I've snuck in. I've snuck in a sneaky Christmas episode.
Hang on, you were going to wear your hat.
I was going to bring a Santa hat in, but I forgot.
I forgot my elf costume too.
But anyway, we thought, and actually, no, joking aside, I've had 2 conversations in board meetings this week already about Christmas parties, about behaviour at previous Christmas parties in some cases, which I will say left quite a lot to be desired, and we had quite a pertinent conversation.
Oh, not your Christmas party.
Oh, not our Christmas party.
I can't remember anything untoward going on at a Wellmeadow Christmas
parties
party.
Are actually quite tame. They are.
They're appropriate.
They are appropriate for where we are. But no, sorry, with the client, and there's certain people involved who behave in certain ways, and that are probably most people would deem unacceptable in a professional work environment.
Yes.
And so we were having that conversation and saying, well, you've got, younger people in the business now. You've got people from a generation that don't have that same kind of, I think if you're kind of a Gen Xer or a boomer, maybe some of this stuff, rightly or wrongly, comments, it's just like maybe par for the course a little bit, or it's kind of brushed off.
A lot of the time it's wanted, it's welcomed.
Yeah.
Bad behaviour at the Christmas party. What happens at the Christmas party stays at the Christmas party, but it doesn't.
No.
Because there are so many pitfalls and there are repercussions.
Well, and I think as well, our generation grew up, we were at university, we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have every single piece of life.
Not everything was recorded in life. No, absolutely.
But But nowadays everything is, and that's another thing to think about.
Absolutely.
The boundaries have changed, the generational expectations have changed, behavior in the workplace has changed, and in many ways in a positive way.
Yeah.
Nobody, I think, wants to go back to the kind of,
60s and
70s and all that kind of stuff, and all of that. But
and, terrible misogyny.
So I thought, like, whilst I've got you coming on the podcast, well, that'd be an interesting thing to touch on, because it is relevant. People will start to be booking their Christmas parties. There is that kind of like, kind of what I've always had what's our expectation? Like a couple of years ago, like, what are we supposed to do as employers? Yes. I remember a couple of years ago, we'd finished our meal at about 11 o'clock, nice restaurant. And I thought, this is great. Everyone's going home now. I can go to bed. And I had a lift home. And then a couple of you decided that you wanted to go to a local place in the evening that year. Yeah. And at 3 a.m, I decided that at that point my duty of care was done. Like, I was just like, right, this is it. I'm out.
Is that the year that somebody spent the night in a building site?
Yeah. And then sent me pictures of it at 5:30 in the morning. And I thought, thank you for that.
Yes.
So, there's always that.
Well, that's one to touch on immediately, isn't it? Because actually you set the expectation as employers that you were paying for drinks until... You might have even stopped for... No, I think you do. You do it for the evening, don't you? But nobody gets... I've never been to a Wellmeadow party where people get, like, drunk. People have drinks and have a good time, but it's not it's not a rowdy occasion. It's civilized. You've seen people go home at 11. You kind of, as an employer, you kind of, you think your duty of care is finished there. A couple of us did go on. Somebody maybe took it a little bit too far. But the problem is then he did come in for maybe an hour, half an hour, very late, and then had to go home because it was absolutely useless. So he couldn't do any work. So that's one thing, isn't it? If people are going to drink in excess, what then do you do with them the next day? And that's something to set the expectations of as well. So there's lots that you can do now. It's only September, as we said, so you can plan for your Christmas party to mitigate some of the risks already. So start by setting the expectations as soon as you send out the invites, or before then, so really important, I think, to have a work event policy in place. Sounds a bit mad, especially to Gen Xers who are used to, it used to be
just crack on.
And we've all got, lots of stories, and probably wish we don't have half of them. But we live in a very different environment now, and it is different at work, and they've got different considerations, and people have different expectations of how they want to be treated and the environments that they want to be in, the culture that we created.
And this is really just an extension of your workplace culture anyway, isn't it? And your workplace behaviour. So it's not something that is just linked into a Christmas party per se. It's part of a broader thing.
Yeah. So your duty, as you said, as an employer, your duty of care doesn't end if you've got a work event. So Christmas party is an obvious one where, of course, that's a work event. It's organised by the business. You're there because you are a part of the company. Can be said to be representing the company. So any work event is where you are representing the company. You're there because of the company, because you're a member of that company. So to put it on like the flip side, if two people from work are mates and they say, let's go for a beer after work, that is not a work event. The company hasn't organised it, they haven't instigated it. That's happened because they have a personal friendship, personal relationship, which is different from the company saying, let's go for team drinks and we'll put the first drink behind the bar for you. That's then a workplace event, and so you have a duty of care, and the workplace is then extended into that event. So you've got the same considerations that you'd have largely in the workplace. Not, on the health and safety side, it's a little bit different, obviously, because it's a different, actual physical environment. But you've got to think about, you still have a duty of care to protect your staff from harassment, bullying, discrimination, and you can be vicariously liable for their actions as well.
That sounds like a big word. What does that mean?
It means that you can get done for stuff that they do.
Okay.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
as you can in the workplace, but you can mitigate it, obviously. Yeah.
So how would you go about what practically could someone do, a business owner or someone now listening to this thinking, okay, we've got a works party coming up for Christmas. Other than cancelling it, just what can people do?
Yeah, so as I said, work event policy is a very good idea. Most businesses, and if you don't, you should have some sort of code of conduct. So something about how you expect people to behave in the workplace. You should certainly have some sort of diversity, equality and inclusion policy, which sets out, again, how you do not discriminate against people, how you treat people equally with respect and dignity, etc. So having the right policies in place is really going to help because it sets the expectations. But beyond that, certainly you should have regular training on diversity, equality and inclusion, and behave, how we behave at work, essentially. And that's going to extend into those workplace events.
So like when we were talking about this before, and I was thinking, okay, what does that training look like? And in my head, I just went to this there's like a bar and everyone's like, right, we're doing like supervised drinking in like a Christmas party.
Yeah.
And Bob's there, Bob, no one wants to see your elephant impression this year.
Bob, put it away.
It was never appropriate. It was never appropriate.
Yeah.
But
it was funny 10 years ago. Well, actually, it wasn't funny 10 years ago. We didn't even like it then. Stop it. So I mean, it doesn't have to be that specific, as in when we go out, you may have 2 drinks, you may not use any swear, but actually some policies will say that you don't curse on work events because it can offend somebody or can, cause a grievance because somebody thinks that, so I went to an event a while ago, a business event, and a couple of senior managers were totally mucking around and very lightheartedly, and this is going to sound much worse than it actually was, kind of imitated a sex act on each other, and that does sound awful. It wasn't much more than twerking, put it that way.
Right.
But if somebody at that event had found that really uncomfortable and offensive, they could have a grievance for harassment because senior managers created a heightened sexualized environment that somebody could be really uncomfortable with, and that could lead to a genuine grievance. So training people is it's kind of generally about how do we conduct ourselves in the workplace. It's different from how we conduct ourselves personally. Well, not for everybody, but there's maintaining professionalism, respecting each other, being aware of, and also making workplace events inclusive. Is inclusivity is such a buzzword, but there's and I think these things go too far sometimes. But there's actually some really sensible advice in that, in terms of don't always do your work events on a Friday evening because that's going to exclude potentially your Jewish employees who tend to go to family night dinners on Fridays, or don't always have events that rotate around alcohol because could exclude people who don't drink and potentially for religious reasons. And having different things on menus and just being aware of cultural differences and what is the makeup of your team as well, and ensuring that you're not excluding anybody from these types of events. It's really important. So also, so you've got your policies in place, you'll have had your training. Do then send out a memo beforehand reminding people, so it's those reminders of, we've got the event coming up, we want everyone to have a brilliant time, however, we don't want you to drink to excess, we will be putting on taxis at a certain time to get you home. If you choose to go out, that's on your own, by your own means, we can't stop you, but this is where for us
that ends. Okay, so there's a line in the sand.
It helps.
Yeah,
it helps. And then think about actually, at the event, how are your managers going to behave? And one really interesting thing that generally comes out in advice is don't take on a role at a party or work event that is your actual role, which sounds a bit odd. But if you're doing something that is like a normal part of your job, then it extends even further into what you do. So the vicarious liability is strengthened. Okay. And don't talk about work. So again, that just kind of moves it a little bit away.
Wow.
Yeah. Because again, if you're, it strengthens that kind of workplace environment, you still got that duty of care. It's not going to go away. But if it's, you know, if it's much more social and then something happens that is way out of your control, then, you know, it separates basically the two to an extent. And have designated people who will be in charge of certain things. So maybe one of the managers is the person who looks out and makes sure, oh, hang on, Bob, put your hand away, Bob. Or, you know, that's 5 drinks. I think Bob is probably enough time to go home. And have someone that is going to be that sort of, take that chaperone role to just ensure that things aren't getting out of hand.
It sounds like there's a part of this where you just think it sounds like we're being killjoys a little bit, doesn't it?
It does. And, you know, it used to be Christmas party was, as I say, you know, what happens at the Christmas party stays at the Christmas party. Everyone lets their hair down. Everyone's allowed to be a bit wild at the end of the year. You got the break then, because a lot of the time you have the party and then you go away and that's kind of walk of shame and the excruciating pain of what did I do last night, and all your colleagues laughing at you is gone because you won't see them till the new year. But I think, we just have to be aware that actually times, they are changing, and what was, you know, acceptable even 10 years ago just isn't now. And unfortunately, you know, it all comes back to the employers. So you might be just trying to do the best thing for your staff and giving them a really good night. But it's best to just really, really be aware of the pitfalls. And if you're putting everything in place, you can't absolutely control people. We know that. But if it came to it, an employment tribunal is going to think, okay, so what did you do to prevent that from happening? And if there's nothing else you could have done, so you've got the policy in place, you've trained people, you've reminded them of how they should behave, you've limited the amount of drinks that you will pay for as an employer, you've, you know, had people sort of designated to be the kind of, you know, the not the designated driver, but the designated sensible people. You know, what else could you have done? You can't absolutely control people because they have their own minds largely. But if you do all you can to sort of put those things in place, then it's going to be looked on a lot more kindly if something does go awry.
And hopefully that's not the case for most people. They have a party and it's all good.
Absolutely,
and it's a good time.
I mean, I've been at a party where there was a guy who punched in he knew. He'd been there for a few weeks and he lamped one of his colleagues. He got fired, obviously. It was good reason. And, you know, I don't know. I think largely gone are the days where you have these incredibly wild parties, but then we live in Shropshire and not the city, and maybe things are, I don't know, things are very different. One thing I would say actually, in that our environment, in terms of where largely our clients are and, you know, the people we tend to work with, I'm not seeing, as an HR professional, a lot of these kind of, you know, what you might think particularly for a Gen X or someone who's, you know, not seeing these types of complaints come out. I'm not seeing a lot of grievances coming through that seem unreasonable. Most of the grievances that I deal with are either because sort of almost circumstantial, where maybe somebody's come to the end of their road with an employer, so they're putting a grievance back at them, or that it's a genuine grievance that really needs to be heard. But I'm not getting a lot of kind of, you know, eye roll, I can't believe that, you know, we're having to deal with this because somebody said something off the cuff. It might be in the cities that it's very different, but, you know, most of my clients aren't city based. It doesn't mean that we can, you know, ignore the culture and environment that we are operating in. And I think it's really sensible to just err on the side of caution and certainly put all the mitigations in place, because it just protects you as an employer.
So okay, so that's really good then, just a kind of refresher, isn't it? That probably stuff that we all know and it's common sense. But as we approach the festive season rapidly, it's 15 weeks yesterday, I think, till Christmas Day, that it's just a timely reminder, I think, for employers just to think about, okay, what is the culture looking like? What is the environment within your business? Are there any particular people or things that you need to watch out for?
And do you know what? That's a really interesting one as well. Sorry, just to pipe in again, because you will give training to everybody. But that doesn't mean that you can't single out specific people, and you should always pull people up on their behavior as soon as it happens. So, and that is something that I see with a lot of clients, is that people are afraid to tackle behaviors and they let them fester. So as soon as you see somebody saying or doing something that you think is out of kilter with your code of conduct, you take them aside as soon as possible on their own, tell them what happened, tell them what should have happened and what you'd like to happen in the future.
Well, the standard of behavior is always set by the leaders. Absolutely. Yeah. So as a leader in a business, whatever level you're at, whether you're the owner or senior management team or, shift manager or whatever, your behavior is going to massively influence how other people behave within the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to these work events, when it comes to these things, you've got to lead by example.
Yeah.
You've got to set the tone, set the standard. And that's how, everyone else can then see that. You build in that authenticity, you build in that trust. We know that our leaders aren't going to go out there and just make fools of themselves and do stuff they shouldn't. Yeah. And they're not being hypocritical by doing stuff and then telling us not to. So as a business leader, you've got to take the lead on that. And I think, this is but there's stuff you can do around it to mitigate your risk, whether it's Christmas party, whether it's just being in the office generally, whether it's going for a drink on a Friday after work. Yeah. It's like, okay, so how do we do that? So I think that's some valuable stuff you've given us today to think about. And, just if everyone remembers, think before you drink.
Oh, that's cheesy.
Oh, that's cheesy. And so on that cheesy note, I shall say thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Remember to like and subscribe and tell all your business colleagues about the SME Growth podcast. And until next time, and Dave's return, which I'm sure you'll all be waiting for, goodbye and all the best with your businesses.